They told me
paying.
not to ask certain classmates.
Exactly.
Yes. So what?
Okay, this goes into your 313298.
Yeah, the choke trunks.
Right, the choke tandems. Sometimes when you are listening to the radio stations, to get to be caller 10, you get a prize. I've heard of people breaking the line to be caller 10. How is this done? Well, I'm not going to tell you, but also, where's the best place to call a station from? Is it the local switch or what? What happens is, you'll notice if you listen to the radio, almost everyone, all your stations in the same area have the same prefix, even if they're not physically located in the area code, such as TV2 in Detroit is well within the borders of 248, but has 313-298 something. And you go, what? That's downtown. They're not even anywhere near it. What there is 313-298 routes to a special switch that doesn't use SS7 and just uses MF trunks. And every CO is supposed to have lines pulled to that. And the problem is when you do that and say, hey, the 10th caller to this line is going to win like $1 million. Thousands of people pick up the phone and hit redial. And you need some way to have the entire phone network not fall apart when that happens. And so what they do is they simply provide T1s that go completely separate, non-SS7 trunks, they don't go through tandems, things like that, so that when these lines get the crap blasted out of them, it doesn't affect normal telephone service.
It just busies out when they get full.
Right, and what'll happen is if you keep hitting redial, you'll see all kinds of weird errors. Sometimes you'll see them go to dead air, sometimes it'll take 10 minutes to ring, sometimes it'll just ring endlessly. More than likely, it didn't go through. Only a small percentage of the calls will actually complete because there are so many people listening to the station hitting redial, especially with things like PBXs and PRIs these days. You can outpulse the number in under a tenth of a second. So, imagine if everyone had a speed dial button on their PBX, just boom, at the exact moment they say that, it will just completely crush the choke switch, but that's what it's for. And honestly, if I were to be doing it, where I would want to be is on a POTS line served from the choke switch. Because the problem you're going to run into is there's only a couple of T1s from every CO going there. And once they're full, your call can't go through. But if you're on the choke switch, you're limited only by the backplane of the system. And so, you really want to be right there.
So you make it past the first round of triage then?
Correct.
And if you want to know what the other side is like, I went to Central Michigan University for a while, and back in the early 90s, they introduced wonderful touch-tone registration. And it was the first semester we ever had. And we were served off a DMS 100 that the university had. So, of course, the word goes out, register for your classes, and we all pick up our phones, start hitting redial. What happens is you have to wait for a dial tone because everyone's picking up the phone at the same time.
And there's only so many dial tone
but it
generators.
got even better. We brought down not only our switch, but Mount Pleasant and the Elma tandem.
Well done.
Because people would call from home, people have their parents call, whatever. And if you don't plan mass calling like that, some really cool, interesting things can happen. Mm-hmm. And if you're dialing 911 or something, it's not funny anymore. But I'd have to wait 5 minutes for a dial tone. It's the only time I've ever had that happen. And there's meetings between phone companies. And
apparently, you don't live in Verizon territory.
It was Verizon territory.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Actually, even worse, ex-GTE Verizon territory, which they're not exactly known for stable.
And on another thing with mass calling, to get on the subject of things like American Idol that use the 866 numbers, what they're actually doing, and the reason that they're using toll-free instead of going, let's do 900 and charge them, or some sort of local number, is that with 800 you can do things like you can route calls from a specific NPA NXX to a specific tandem kit code. You can route calls based on LATA. You can route calls based on the state they come from. And so you can globally redistribute all of your call taking all over the place. So there's not one central area. So if you're getting like 1 billion calls from California, like, oh dude, I like Sanjay or whatever, oh my God. they're probably not even leaving the state of California. They may not even be leaving Irlata.
It goes down to the exchange level.
Well, you know,
Yeah.
when it looks up, because anytime an 866 number or a toll-free number gets looked up, it gets digits in a switch pointed at it saying, hey, this is the phone number this 866 is actually pointed to. What a lot of people actually don't know. No, it's not true anymore.
No.
Oh, wow, because, well, it used to be it was pointed at a POTS line.
It's pointed to a LD carrier who then translates it to a POTS if they choose.
Okay, yeah,
But before
yeah.
that, they do the SMS lookup, and that's where a lot of the routing goes. Like, depending
Right,
on
because
where
you can
you're coming
dynamic,
from,
because you can see where it's coming from.
it'll go down to exchange. So if a bunch of people in my area want to call Sanjay, you know, it'll go down. You know, have 5, 6 carriers to send it to, based on the exchanges.
Oh, yeah,
So
okay.
that we can all vote for our favorite titles.
And the
That's
other
how it
thing,
sounds.
that's the other thing I get a lot of questions about. How do I find out where a toll-free number is pointing? Don't even ask. Basically, your toll-free number is pointing at a long-distance carrier, and that's all the databases that normal people have access to tell you. Inside the long-distance carrier, they have their own routing tables that could be deciding a number of things. They could say, send the first 5 calls here, send the next 10 calls here, and then send 25% of the remainder here, unless it's after 7 p.m., at which case you send it down this dedicated T1 trunk.
Though a lot of people, like, they'll inherit, and this is something I run into a lot. I have actually doing orders where we're porting over a 866 number to the carrier, and we sometimes need to find out who originally had it when I set up the paperwork. If you Google for Resborg ID lookup, there is actually a number run by AT&T. It is a toll-free number, ironically, that you can call and punch in the toll-free number, and it will tell you the ID of the company, and if it's in their database, it'll tell you the name.
And it will tell you the trouble reporting number.
Yeah, it'll also tell you the trouble reporting
It's
number.
under Ameritech Resborg ID.
Yeah.
The
I'm sorry,
responsible
responsible organization for the number. Who actually decides where this call's going to if somebody dials it?
Yeah, toll-free is kind of weird. They have something called the SMS that's a main database. It has nothing to do with short message, by the way. And you can become a responsible organization for a number, and then when you do that, you are responsible for updating the entries in the SMS. And typically, a customer can be a Resborg. They usually aren't, but if you run into somebody like IBM, they probably run their own Resborg, because it'll save them some dough and let them have a lot more control because they can control directly where the number routes.
Well, yeah, this is how call center routing is done as well. When you call, like, 1-800 or 866-41 now or Comcast or something, and your first call when you call them is in Canada, the second one's in India, the third one's in wherever. A lot of times this is how they're doing that, and they can control that. So if a call center goes down, they can just immediately flip it rather than having to call their carrier, have the carrier update it, and a couple hours later they're finally back up.
Right, and the Resborg is not always the carrier. A lot of people use their carrier as the Resborg, but it is possible to have several carriers that are pointed to by a single Resborg. So you can say, hey Resborg, when someone calls from here, send them to this carrier because it's cheaper from this SLATA. Otherwise, send them to this carrier. And they will go into the database and add that entry. And if there's a problem, the Resborg is the one responsible for the errors. And so the Resborg has trained people that are only doing SMS, that know what they're doing. They have 24-hour requirements that somebody has to be available to fix it, because you can't just go around breaking the 800 number database for your own,
For fun and profit.
yeah, for fun and profit.
ATL Communications is one that I've used in the past.
Right,
Because
there's a
the
number
routing
of
gets
them.
so complicated that sometimes it's easier just to say, send all the calls here, because it gets so detailed that we really don't want the hassle.
Right.
I was just going to say, I've had this question. And it's actually kind of a interesting one because it gets a little bit into what you can do hacking-wise. Would you suggest that a home asterisk experimenter get an ISDN BRI, basic rate interfaces, for purposes of messing with the D channel, or can all the fun be had with an internet termination provider? What I'm going to start off by saying is try ordering an ISDN BRI these days. I've tried recently. It's not easy. You can theoretically still get one. They make a living hell to do so. They don't want you ordering them.
Right, they're non-tariffed in Michigan.
They're non-tariffed in Michigan, for example, and I'm sorry?
Not being $228 a month for a BRI.
Yeah, and they're also kind of pricey.
For that price, for a couple $100 more, you could probably have a PRI.
Yeah, you get a PRI and
Why
have
would you
24
bother?
channels of fun. Or
23.
23 plus 1D for 64K D channel. Though, if you're trying to mess with the D channel,
And the PRI has a lot more Q931 messages that are actually supported.
yeah.
So,
But in terms of hacking it, other than please don't,
yeah, just knock it off. Behave.
well, there's a lot of abuse as it is. There was a recent bug that came up, or Paul had discovered with Sapura phones, that people were messing with the D channel in terms of how they were starting billing. There's a thing called early audio, where you can play audio before the call's technically terminated because it saves you a couple seconds on billing.
Right.
This tends to screw up other devices that are expecting to see call completion. If they don't see it in a certain amount of time, they drop the call.
Right, and they don't pass audio until they see a call completion. But say for Northwest Airlines, as an example, does this, they will send audio before they technically answer the call.
And actually, in terms of BRI versus internet termination, if your internet termination provider who's providing SIP trunking or asterisk trunking is any good, they're going to be filtering some of this stuff if they can, preventing you from saying, hey, I'm coming from the White House or something like that. When you announce your number.
It is a lot of fun for screwing with your friends, though.
It is. Yeah, it is. Yeah, you can do amazingly fun things when calling your friends and whatnot. But if they're any good, they'll be filtering it. Your PRI provider, if they're any good, will also be doing the same thing, or your BRI provider. This being said, if your BRI or PRI provider happens to be a ILEC, they're dumb. There was, and even as far back as, for example, I had a Sprint TDM T1 back in '96-ish that you could announce any digits you wanted to. We didn't discover this until somebody said, do you realize that your phone switch is erroring out and sending 999, 999, 9999 to every call that goes out that thing? Wow, I didn't think it would let us do that. Because normally they'll mask that from numbers that they know it to be, or will sometimes even throw rejects.
I
But
had
again,
an SBC PRI where you could actually call from 69.
Yeah, you don't have to announce much. When you see a lot of the stuff calling in from on the caller ID digits, it's actually a separate data stream.
And if they've got you built as a trunk group anyway, it doesn't matter what number you could be trunk group 100 with them and sending out 69. They still know who you are.
Yeah, they'll know who you are for billing, but you can really jam caller ID that way.
Yeah, and the
Yeah,
other
that's
thing,
that's
when
fun.
we come into things like caller ID and being able to specify arbitrary things, it's important to describe how caller ID with name actually works. A lot of people think, oh, well, I can just send facilities IE with whatever name I want. Ha ha ha. It doesn't work that way. What happens is that there's a database lookup that occurs on the recipient's end if they subscribe to the service. And they translate the number you sent to a name based on the caller ID with name database that they're using. And there's actually a couple, and there are some conflicts between them, which will cause sometimes really amusing trouble tickets. Like, hey, when I call my friend, it comes up as like Joe's Pizza, but I call my mom and it says, Timmons Paul. What's going on? Well, there's two different databases, and one of them's using one, and one of them's using the other, and one of them's obviously wrong. But I've had a lot of questions like, hey, I want to change the number that comes up or the name that comes up. And they're like, can I just do this with my PRI? And no, you really can't.
Yeah.
You have to call your phone company who submits a change to the caller ID with name database.
Because the other thing that's tied is the E911 stuff tied to the same changes?
No, there's no why.
That is through the AOI? Okay. Usually it's on the same form when you set up the caller ID with name on my end. You see the same form, but it's actually a different
CNAM
database.
is the SS7 IN group.
Okay.
The CNAM, or 911's like a separate group with no sense of humor. I think they were in Ohio last I checked.
Okay.
Right, and one thing that I want to quick add about spoofing caller ID essentially is about many phone companies being dumb. In Pennsylvania, one thing that I know is that Verizon is really dumb. I have
That's
called.
pretty universal.
Yeah, actually, yeah. I call my house regularly as 666. Why? Because I can. However, my experience has been with the CLEC that I have at home, I have one of those Flex T1 PRI voice and data, all burstable, happy, fun stuff things. And a lot of times, and this is how it's been explained to me, Paul, clarify if you could, that if I try sending in a number outside my DID block, it actually messes with E911.
Yes, often what happens is that the number